Hi, Janet. Good evening
Hello,
to
Ram.
you. Good evening to you. It's morning for me at this point in time. We are here with an audience. I'm pre-recording this session for you. It's going to be held later. And the audience is primarily coaches, coaching learners from India. And what I would like to do is to present you to the audience at this point in time. Uh, Janet is not only a renowned coach, she has been the chair of the board of ICF for several years, and she has been both in the professional executive space as well as in as a coach and mentor. And far more importantly, she has been a mentor to me during my MCC journey, and there's a tremendous lot that I have learned from her and her own concept of sovereignty, uh, in a sense, what I interpret as transcendence in coaching. And she wrote an article on that subject in the Appreciative Inquiry thematic magazine a while ago. Uh, Janet runs a company. She is CEO of Invite Change. It has got probably the largest number of MCC coaches that I know who are coming together to mentor and coach other people. And I have had a couple of great evenings with them some years ago. And in fact, that meeting and something that preceded that meeting forms part of a book that I have recently written, which is going to be published by EMCC. So here I would like to present without much further interference from me between you and Janet, Janet Harvey.
Thank you, Ram. And um, there's something in your grace of being both a leader in your country and a really around the world as a coach to tip your hand in my direction in that same way. To me, it's one of the hallmarks of our field of practice on its way to being a profession, the generosity of spirit we have. And I think it's part of what also allows us to create that same space for our clients. So the way we are together is the way we are with clients, is the way that it ripple effects out to other people. And you'd ask me about why sovereignty, why this topic, why am I deeply invested in its exploration. And that might be a good place to start because as a coach educator, I watched participants come through our course room, and after only 100 hours of client experience, they are able to be with people in a highly transformative way. And something that I had associated with a much more advanced level of experience. Certainly higher to the 500 to 750 hours of experience, if we put it in the ICF context, and on your way to 2,500 hours. And of course, I've always known that, practice with bad habits doesn't make you a great coach. It's not just about experience. That there are lots of elements that go into a highly effective and artful practitioner. And so I went on the hunt for what are the underlying mindsets and attitudes and self-awareness processes, reflection practice that support someone in being artful more quickly than their experience hours would suggest. And I really didn't have an answer when I first started. I asked the entire team to pay attention to this. Something that we do at our organization, you don't pass our ACTP program without demonstrating at the top end of the PCC, which means people are already pre-MCC in their capacity. And it doesn't make our program easy. And I'm really proud to say that we have a 98% graduation rate, and those that don't pass, it's usually done by the second time. And they know exactly what it was in the way that they showed up. That was an obstacle to them being able to demonstrate at that artful level. And I'm not saying that to be braggadocious in any way about our teaching. I do think there is something about experiential learning that's highly effective. Most coaches know that. But I think there's something about choosing to set down the convenience of our personality. So much of adult professional life is identified with expertise, the acquisition of knowledge and the translation of knowledge into action and the ability to produce results. And most of the time, that's associated with somebody else's standard. The boss tells us what the expectation is, and we do our darndest to figure out how to deliver on the expectation. And as long as we keep doing that, we keep on having a job. Maybe we even get a bonus. Maybe we even get a promotion. And for so many people inside of the workplace, at some moment we realize, really, is this all there is? There's just not enough activation for me that helps me be purpose-driven, that helps me to recognize what's unique about me and to connect and be in relationship with people in a way that I feel a sense of belonging and relatedness and some freedom to express my uniqueness in that place that I live most of my waking hours, which is our vocation. And so as I began to look at that question, how do people arrive at the moment of, wow, is this all there is? And then what's the pathway to arrive at a place that says, yes, because it's all inside of me, and begin to pull back the projection that it lives outside in somebody else's expectations and acknowledgement and reward of us, and come back home to the self. And to me, the journey of coming back home to the self is what sovereignty is all about. At its root, it's a term that means self-ruling. The monarch butterfly is a lovely metaphor. Anybody who studies butterflies would discover that it makes a 2,000-mile journey. It returns to the place that its original legacy spawned the first cocoon and caterpillar and monarch. And it has no way of knowing that. It's usually 3 to 4 generations later. So there's something about the interconnectedness of the human experience. At the same time, paradoxically, the individuality of any one person's incarnation into the human existence. And how do we learn to hold both so that we are honoring the magnificence of being human beings and the miraculousness, perhaps, of an individual person coming into being? I know for myself, I didn't decide to live a sovereign life until I had hit that moment. And for me, I was about 39 years old, and I'd been a corporate officer for several years. I owned my home. I traveled all over the world. Anything I professionally wanted, I had accomplished. Education, professional, notoriety. And I was bored. I was completely bored. I couldn't find my savvy, sassy self anywhere. And I realized that it was time for me to set down striving and seeking in favor of who am I being? What is it that I'm passionate about? What is it that I'm here to do? What's my life purpose? And how am I making choices that are integrous with what I'm here to do? And how do I express to people that's who I am? Because I realized that for probably a couple of decades, I'd been a really good imposter. Whatever somebody wanted, I could figure out how to deliver that. And I was very effective at it. But I wasn't very happy. I wasn't very satisfied. And the truth is, there were people who I think realized that there was something more to me, but they weren't finding a way in to connect with me. And so that journey of starting to live what I would call the sovereign life has been about setting down all the trappings of answering to somebody else's expectations in favor of architecting my own life experience. And this is what we do in the development of a coach, to help them to realize that until they learn to take their own personal journey towards sovereignty, to set down someone else's expectations, they won't find the clients that are meant for them. They won't be attracting people who are seeking in the way that they sought. And they won't be prepared to take the breadth and depth of journey that client is wanting. We must go first where we want to take our clients. And to me, the journey of living sovereign for a coach practitioner is the opportunity to be in an evergreen or a generative relationship to our work. There's no end game. It's a continuous learning journey that is filled with inspiration and wonder.
Jana,
That's what you were asking.
yeah, absolutely. It's a lot more than what I asked, and thank you. Honestly, thank you. Yeah, a couple of, first of all, I really didn't know that a butterfly traveled 2,000 miles or 3,000 miles and came back to the same place that it did and sort of finding itself. That's absolutely news to me. So as one more part of my learning exercise, I'll start learning a little more about butterflies actually. But a couple of things that you said really resonated for me. One is the journey back into the self. And you also said something about you should have been where you want to take the client. I think that many coaches uh, sort of seem to forget that simple aspect of
Mm.
we talk about transformational coaching, transcendental coaching, all kinds of stuff, interpersonal. Sir John Whitmore,
Mm.
his soul rest in peace, his
Yeah.
transpersonal, amazingly powerful concept. The whole thing to me somehow implies, and it's been my experience, and uh, I just would like to check with you. For me, this journey to become a coach, unlike you, I started very, very late in my life. My resonance started probably in my late 50s. At 39, I was still very focused on making my millions and going into a larger corner office, as it were. It started with a trauma, and that was where the hero's journey started for me in terms of completely turning my life upside down. So now, for you, that shift, as you talked about 39 and moved into something which made you relook at your whole life and leading to this point of, as what you term as a sovereignty, reaching your own self, as it were, coming home. What was that experience like?
Mm. One of the things that has been true for me now for a very long time is that I do not hold that change only happens by crisis. It's one way change happens, but it's not the only way. And I also believe that coaching is consciousness. It's a current term for it, but that the work that's possible, work's even that not quite a very descriptive word, and Sir John would be chuckling at me right now. And the mystery that unfolds in the authenticity of a coach-client interaction is one that is a remembrance more than it is something that is brand new. That everything that the soul requires for a completely satisfying and fulfilled life came in with us. So not all spiritual traditions believe that. And there's lots in the physics arena that would support it, that all the energy necessary to initiate our universe existed in the instant it was birthed 14 billion years ago. So all we're doing is transmitting energy over and over and over again. And we could probably go on and look at some other theories, but to answer your question, I'm offering this to say it was a moment when I realized I had been expending tons and tons and tons of energy. And don't get me wrong, I had a blast. I loved everything I had done in my professional career. And yet I was feeling like, really? Come on, there's got to be another thing. And so kind of the first realization is I was probably an adrenaline junkie. God gave me lots of energy and lots of capacity, and I used it all. And I realized that just because I could doesn't mean I should. Just because I have capacity doesn't mean exercising it. Anytime anybody made an offer, I would make a promise. And I would deliver on that promise. And sometimes it just wasn't all that much fun. And I began to ask myself the deeper question. What if everything I did was fun? What if I only said yes to the things that I knew were completely enlivening to me? What would be different in my life? And that every yes is a no, and that every no is a yes. And I'd only been looking at one side of that formula. So I began in that next decade of my life. I actually, after 20 years of living in San Francisco, California, I moved all the way across the United States. And I was living on the East Coast in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I spent about 5 years in my the origins of being an entrepreneur on a silver tube, flying around the world doing consulting and training and coaching. And I kind of hit a moment when I said, well, this has been fun and I've made a big difference. I've had a big impact, and I don't really like being on an airplane all the time. This is not the part of my vocation that I want to keep perpetuating. I wonder what would happen if I just sat still. What would come towards me? And so kind of that next period of time was about what was attraction and who did I need to show up as in order for people to recognize that I had something that they would find useful, pleasurable. And I, it's so funny. That's when I met my now husband. It was about that moment when I stopped flying on airplanes and I sat still that I learned about relationship and the importance of vulnerability to relationship. Now, of course, I'm speaking to coaches, so I'm hoping you're getting the parallel that in my own life, the degree to which I would allow for the vulnerability, deeper connection was available. And with the deeper connection came a whole nother level of interior power. And I'm using power on purpose. I don't mean power over. I do mean power with myself, to stand in a certain unconditional self-love, the reflection on self that says, oh yes, everything I am is exactly as it's to be. And it's up to me to be a choice about how I allow that to be my pathway, my basis, my impetus, my creativity, my life force, and not anybody else. And that's a big responsibility. At the moment I realized that I got to decide and it was my job to decide, then I went through a period of time and we ended up, obviously my husband and I are now married, but we moved to the Pacific Northwest. So here's this Midwest girl who's gone to the West Coast and goes all the way back to the East Coast with a stint living in London. And then I move all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. I mean, you can't get to those far enough corners. So I suppose in some ways I did my own Native American medicine wheel, and I do feel at home here in the Pacific Northwest, and it coincides with the time when I came home to myself and realized that, what a gift. Yes, a responsibility, but what a gift to be alive and to have all my faculties and to have the privilege to support people in the same journey that I'd just been walking for the last, at that point, 40 years of who am I and what matters to me and how do I enliven my life through my choices and in the way that I'm living it sovereign, how do I enliven others? Because that's what is reciprocal and perpetual for me. So it's a deep listening to the self and a deep curiosity and wonder about what I'm experiencing. And if it really is in alignment with what enlivens me, that's the journey. And it's still going. And much to my team's chagrin, of course. The company is called Invite Change for a reason.
Yeah. It's a prophecy fulfilled, and those who are willing to take the risk, they should come. Yeah, it's amazing. Like what you said, the silver tube, I would have thought was magnesium aluminum tube, but letting go in a silver tube led you to your husband, serendipity. I can sort of resonate with that because as you're talking about it, I'm India born. I'm now a citizen of Singapore, living part of the time in India. I'm a permanent resident of the United States. So it somehow or other just seems to flow. And I know you, having seen that you live on an island and every day you commute to mainland and take a boat. We were just talking about whether you would like to kayak or sail, whatever you do. There's something fantastic. I just would like to make it a little more, in a sense, whatever we are saying in terms of application to the coaches who are listening in here. One of the things that when I mentored with you on my MCC journey, and I learned a tremendous lot, and in fact, very often I quote that when I talk to people, especially about my MCC, and now that I'm an MCC, so I could, with some justification, claim that it helped me, was that you always talked about this, I don't know whether it's a metaphor or simile, whatever it might be. You used to say that at a mastery level, it's like a coach riding a horse, and the horse knows where to go. You don't have to do anything about it. At preliminary levels of maybe early stages of learning of coaching, you would need to push the horse, nudge the horse, and so on and so forth. But at the end of it, you are completely convinced that you know that the horse knows where to go. And around that time, parallelly, I read Milton Erickson, and I read about that famous story of his, where he rode that horse bareback, and it reached the farmer's house, and the farmer said, "How did you know it was my horse?" He said, "I don't." The horse knew. So that is in a sense. So it's something which has always resonated for me. Whenever I talk to people about what mastery level coaching is, I can't resist myself going back to say, "Hey, this is what Janet told me." So would you like to expand a little bit on that, which becomes a kind of bit of an education for people who are listening to you?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that metaphor. It's a really fun one. So when one is first learning to ride a horse, it is really important to get comfortable being around a horse. So they are very sensitive beings, and they are completely aware of fear. So one of the reasons we put saddles, a blanket and a saddle and a halter and the reins on, it is actually more for the rider than it is for the horse. Because the power of the horse is far bigger than the rider has the confidence and courage to be with. So the structure of the reins and the bit and the saddle and the stirrups provide a way for the rider and the horse to be in relationship with each other. So there's a certain way in which the power innate in the horse and the power of the human being gets harnessed. And together they can make a decision. You learn to pull the reins left or right or all the way back or leave them forward. You learn to move your body in the seat forward or backward. To when you're trotting, you learn to lift up out of the stirrups so that you're not pounding on the saddle, and there's a certain gait, and you begin to sense a flow as the horse is trotting. And ultimately, with a very soft, subtle movement, we move into a canter, and another subtle movement, we move into a gallop. And you no longer have to pull the reins back anymore, because there's a union that's happened. There's a merge that's occurred through the power of both the bodies, the horse body and the human body. And with time and practice, both beings get to know each other. They know their breathing. They know their the intensity of the pressure of your knees against the cage of the animal. And the animal is able to communicate when we've been running too long, it's time to slow down, or when there's danger, or when something needs to be leaped over. And the body, both bodies are moving in harmony. And it has lots of meanings, that word. So what happens for a coach is that we begin to realize that we're not afraid anymore. And the first thing that usually goes with a rider over time is the saddle. And all we have is the blanket, which is in order to keep us from sliding off the back. We still have the reins. And with time, we lose the blanket, right? Because we've learned to catch our legs around the cage of the animal. And then we lose the reins and the bit, and we start to put our hands on the mane of the horse. Now we start to get that physical merging that's going on. Sometimes sound is added, and I'm purposely staying in the metaphor because one of the things that a coach progresses with is the sophistication of their perceiving. We start in coaching by hearing the words and using our cognitive prowess to be curious about its meaning. And we're curious in a way that is helping a client hear themselves think, being a good critical thinking partner. With time, the words mean nothing because it's actually nothing to do with the content or the context that a client is bringing to a session. What matters is, how are they relating to it? What is the emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual meaning for this client about what they have chosen to bring to coaching? Remembering that our responsibility is to create awareness ultimately, so that the client learns something about themselves that will support making a different choice of behavior or action so that they make movement toward some outcome they're seeking that has meaning and usefulness in their lives. And that's the point in the metaphor when we no longer need the reins. And we start to pay attention to energy shift when intuition is being used. Long-time riders on horses will tell you they know when the horse is about to dig their heels in and make a harsh stop. They also know when the horse is ready to go to the barn. And there's this almost telepathic communication that starts to occur. Well, the same is true in coaching. We learn to listen to the subtle cues that the client is about to be at the moment of insight that is most important in the session. And we stay quiet just a moment longer. What Nancy Klein calls generative listening. That it doesn't need our intervention because who we've been being in the moment, the field we've created together is the pregnant question. And the client has that question inside of them, that we're witnessing it with them in complete respect and honor and acceptance is what gives them the courage to say it out loud, to witness themselves saying exactly what they are available to experiment and to risk moving towards. And in the same way that we can naturally move through from a walk to trotting to canter to gallop, that pacing is something that we can initiate with a very subtle question, with a very subtle acknowledgement of a moment when we see the client really deeply inside themselves and we ask them, and what are you aware of now? It's a very simple question. Out of context does not seem in any way like powerful questioning. But in the moment of the context, when the client has been exploring the beliefs they have that are keeping them small and not stepping into the greatness of themselves, and we've asked the question that causes them to pause into deeper inquiry. And we let them be with themselves for a bit. We're in the canter. And the movement to the gallop is when we ask, and what are you aware of now? And the breakthrough comes. And they say, what I'm aware of is I've had this all the time. And I've allowed myself to believe in somebody else's dream, not my own. And it's time now for me to get my own backbone and to stand for what matters to me. And in that moment of insight, we celebrate that they've come back home. We acknowledge that they've been with us in exactly the way, with all the bravery required, that they want to be with their board, their family, their community, whatever it is that they brought as their context. And from that awareness, then, we switch and we start the walk back to the barn to say, all right, well, what's your how? And what's your by when? And where are your collaborators and resources? And what will be the evidence that you're on your way? And what will you put in place to celebrate? And how will that make a difference in the world? And what will we stay connected to so those moments of doubt have a balance and a friend that remembers faith is a twin sister. So there you go. That's how I would describe it.
you even as you described it, and somewhere you said words don't mean anything, but actually, as I was listening to you, what really came up for me was this picture of the centaur, the half human, half horse, the harmony, the congruence, and almost another frame, the whole concept of Carl Rogers in terms of client congruence, half human and half man, as it were, half horse, as it were. It's something tremendously evocative. And that leads me to another experience that I had with you was about, yeah, as you said, the deep listening. I really learned that you don't have to think about asking questions. If you just listen, and you talked about Nancy Klein's generative listening, if you really listen deep and if you really listen to the client with your full energy, and the questions would always come up. And that's probably what generative listening is. And you had talked about generative wholeness. Um, would you like to explain how that links with generative wholeness that you talk about?
Yeah, sure. So I've been trying to understand for a while um, the next question. So the first question was, well, what is it about the way that we're training our coaches that has them build such confidence and self-awareness and self-acceptance to step into being coach and do so from an authentic self, from the essence of themselves, and to be sovereign? So then the next question I asked was, and when someone coaches from the stance of being sovereign, what's the impact on the client that has that be a successful, what we would call a successful quality experience? And I began to, I looked at this in the spiritual texts. I looked at this in the social science research. I looked at this in neuroscience. And I kept trying to find something that would capture what I was experiencing as a very fluid and dynamic capacity that clients walked away from coaching with and seemed to revere. It's like, oh, thank you. I have my mojo back. It's like, okay, that's a little bit like saying, and magic happened. It was wholly unsatisfying to me. And so I started to pay attention to some of the changes, some of the ways that new behavior was emerging. And one of the first things that I saw was imagination. That clients begin to dream again. They start to originate in their lives. And they give themselves permission to not know and have a certain wonder that, well, if I don't know, then I can make it up. And then the next thing that showed up was that they could not only make it up, but if it was something enlivening to them, if it had alignment to the essence of who they are, to their value system, to their core principles, they had no trouble identifying, and I could do this, and I could do that, and I could do this, and I could do that. The whole creating an idea into physical form, giving it tangibility, some solidity, some groundedness, happened very easily. And then how do we sustain it? To me, that was always important. I didn't want to just have people have a great experience of a coaching relationship with me. I wanted to know that their life was fundamentally transformed in some way and that they were going to live their lives in a new way as a result of our work together. And truly, that's learning. So that kind of the first insight about what kind of learning was reflection. That by restoring being able to originate or imagine something new and to start to create, it was important for the client to recognize, oh, I did that. I imagined and originated. And look, I have all these plans that I could follow. So if I could do it here, I could do it in this domain, and I could do it in that domain, and I could do it in this domain, and I could do it with these people, and I could do it at this stage in my life. And now I could be a learner and produce results all on my own. I have my formula. So that's the meaning of generative, the dynamic capacity to originate, to create, to learn, and produce results that we want. I've added wholeness to it because I think it's a part of the formula. And I don't mean that as you do this step and then that step, but more that the experience of living generatively, when it's connected to the essence of who we are, which is my definition of wholeness, which is the freedom to express from essence in any and all relationship. And when we are in our wholeness, behaving in a generative way, we've come home. There isn't any need to compare anymore. We have nothing that will trigger us in believing that we haven't met some expectation other than our own. And our own don't count. We don't judge ourselves, not unless something exterior has caused us to believe we're less than in some way. But if we've truly stepped into our sovereignty, we're not less than. We're more than we can imagine. And then it's the wonder of discovering that over and over and over again. What's the next piece of my potential to express in the world? And I now know how, because I've had that direct experience of remembering. I know how to originate, create, learn, and produce in my life, whatever it is I choose from the essence of who I am. So that's what generative wholeness is.
Absolutely fantastic. And again, as you were talking about it, I lost myself a bit in a sense. I was reflecting back as you talked about these words, generative and the wholeness and coming home and finding the self. In fact, I mean, that's a separate conversation. We can have it another day if you're interested. You talk about spirituality.
Sure.
The opening verse of probably one of the oldest scriptures in the world, the Upanishads, the Sanskrit scriptures of Hindu religion. It's called the Isa Upanishad. It talks about the creative fullness. The word they use for that is Isa. And that is how I think later the Hebrew word and the word Jesus came to being as well. I believe so. And it's about that this world is fullness, you are fullness. You came out of that fullness, and that fullness still remains. And it's almost that when we have in a coach-client relationship, you are restoring that fullness back to the client and let the client retain their sovereignty. And I mean, it opens up gateways and gateways for me as I think about it. So, Janet, in the interest of time, coming to the close of this conversation, so at the end of it, what would you like to sort of give away for the audience to take home with them, as it were, take to their barns with them?
I think the most important practice for all of us as coaches is one of embracing the power of reflection. And I think that it's really easy, particularly when we're successful doing a lot of work, or if we're not successful at all, to obsess about what we do and lose our connection to who we're being. And forget that it's who we're being that is the source of relationship. And without relationship, we don't have a practice. So it is really important to attend to ourselves and our sense of well-being. And I think the practice of self-reflection, to pay attention to replaying the experiences we have with our clients, looking for the patterns of how did we bring ourselves, what was the influence we had on our client, how did we allow them to influence us, what are we learning here, what are we wanting to learn next, that this is all what starts to emerge when we quiet to allow that to come forward. And those practices are what keep us in the delight of being a coach practitioner. So that would be my request and my invitation.
Thanks a lot, Janet. Actually, what comes up for me again is, as you said those words, is now when I'm coaching someone, if I can sort of find myself morphing into a centaur, human, part horse, part coach, and part client, and being completely congruent, I think I would be in that space too. Thank you very, very much for this truly enlightening conversation. And so as we actually play this recording at this point in time, I'm hoping you would be there to answer the question that the audience asked for. Thanks a lot.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you, Ram. What fun.
Yeah.